now how many banks, European banks, are connected to this China Interbank payment system. Let's
Right.
check in 12 months how many banks will be connected to this China Interbank payment system. Not only the number of banks, the amount of sums transacted. We can also see in 12 months how many European companies may have done what Total Energies did a few weeks ago. So we do have some indications, but we also have the other side that can give us some indications. Let's look at how many sums will be pledged by China for the reconstruction of Ukraine. At a certain point in the next months, we may start this conversation, at least in the West. And that would be interesting to see how China moves in what direction. So we can have, in terms of observation, a few indicators that can tell us whether we're moving this direction. Some from Europe, others from China. But numbers cannot be wrong. I can be wrong in 12 months. I could be right if these indicators are on the rise. But what it is important to underline is that we are really entering into a new world whereby the old assumptions are not valid anymore. Who could have thought only a few years ago that China would propose a 12-point peace plan for Ukraine, even if it was not sufficient for the West, because it is still perceived to be
it's the buffer state idea,
leaning
right?
towards Russia. And who could have thought that China could have and will have a role in the reconstruction of Ukraine once the arms, if not come to an end, at least once a ceasefire or some political settlement will be found.
I think that makes a lot of sense. And if I wrap it up, is there any kind of index or kind of how to track these numbers? Because I imagine Total deal, is that announced, or do you know of any of these data sources? And we link them in the show notes.
It was announced.
I think
it was like many things nowadays. It seems that sometimes mainstream media is quite doesn't give us what we need to know on certain developments in the world. So it was announced, it was, and you can find it also on their website, but it was, it was found in other kind of outlets. I think only Bloomberg had a few lines, but most of the newspapers and TVs didn't mention it, probably because they thought it was not important.
Right.
But again, sometimes the important things are those that, especially if they're emerging, are those that are not very flashy at the beginning and have to be followed. Now, this is one of the issues here, like that you have to track these numbers, like in the case of the China Interbank payment system on their website and try to see how many banks. Sometimes what I did in the past also check if some European banks were actually part of the system, to what extent, etc. Now, there's also another indicator, which is the use of the special drawing rights of the IMF that I mentioned before. Again, in the case of the reconstruction of a country like Ukraine, the IMF will be asked to intervene quite substantially. Now, another indicator would be to observe the kind of discussions that the five entities, because in the case of the Eurozone, you have more a political entity. Sure. The Japan, the UK, the United States, the Eurozone, and China, the kind of discussions that they would have when it comes to the amount of special drawing rights to issue to fund the reconstruction of Ukraine. That would be also a very interesting indicator, because then countries will pledge their a certain amount of money to be channeled for the IMF for the reconstruction. So Chinese money may not go directly to Ukraine, might be channeled for the, probably more likely channeled for the IMF. The substance doesn't change, it's only the channel that changes, which means that this is another indicator to track what happens in China in some areas, what happens in Europe, in some areas, and what happens inside the IMF when it comes to the use of special drawing rights that will be used, very likely, in the reconstruction of Ukraine post-conflict.